Well, welcome again. My name is Jessica Stokes, and I'm one of the interim co-directors of Partners in Health and Wholeness, which is a program of the North Carolina Council of Churches. Today, we are delighted to have a conversation, a sacred conversation, part of our series entitled Eco Grief and Gratification. So this is going to be a wonderful conversation on how we can come to grips with the world that we live in and the part we have to play in fixing our common home. So this conversation is going to deal about the mental health, the overall, the worry and anxiousness we may feel about the climate change impact on our world, and creation care that we are working to incorporate in our overall health efforts. Partners in Health and Wholeness is dependent on our world, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and so much more is impacted, from maternal health to healthy aging to mental health and more. So today's conversation is very much about health, as well as many things, since our climate and world impacts all that we are and all that we do. So next slide, Elizabeth, thank you. So for today's agenda, we will have a welcome and a prayer, and then Ren is going to present to us, and it will be a conversational type presentation. So feel free to put any questions in the chat. We will get to those later on. And then we have a couple of exciting announcements at the end of our time together. So Elizabeth, thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate you. At this time, let's take a moment to just center ourselves and join me in prayer. A couple of deep breaths, since today's conversation is a lot. God of love and hope, we ask that you center us, God. Center us in our bodies, center us in our minds, center us so that we can be with each other and ultimately you, God. Open our hearts and our minds so that we can learn together and be convicted and be moved. Learn to help from each other and learn to help each other. Learn to better our communities. Learn to live faithfully and learn to live a life of wholeness that is anchored in your teachings and in your love. Thank you, God, for this day and this time. Thank you for helping us be here today so that we can go out into the world, God, and make it a more loving and just place. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Great. So at this point, I'm very excited to share with you all who Ren is. We are so happy to have Ren on staff with us at North Carolina Council of Churches. Ren, you joined, was it July, August? So yeah, but either way, we're so fortunate to have Ren with us. Ren, you serve with us as the Eco Justice Connection Program Coordinator. A way that I've heard it said in staff meetings is that, what do you and Susanna say? You're co-dreamers,
We're thought partners.
thought partners. I love that. I mean, I just think that's so cool. Thought partners. So to tell you more about Ren recently joined the council after working at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light as a communications coordinator. Ren is a fall 2021 graduate of Virginia Tech, where they earned their bachelor's degree in agricultural sciences with minors in urban forestry and leadership. During their time at Virginia Tech, they were able to teach school children and lead as a vice president in a student organization and worked with North Carolina's corporate extension. They were born and raised in Richmond. Ren grew up visiting their grandparents in the countryside of Buckingham, Virginia. And due to these experiences, they have a profound love for the environment, making artwork and meeting new people. Ren was raised as a Catholic and later came back to the faith during their time in college. And now Ren's spirituality is a large part of their life, and they're eager to learn from all walks of life. So welcome, Ren. Thank you. That's so cool. You're a Hokie, a Virginia Tech graduate. I mean, that's really cool.
Ooh, go
We're
Hokies.
excited to learn from you today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here today and to share my presentation about eco grief and gratification. Let me share my screen. Let's see. And I just want to make sure that everyone's seeing it okay. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so as Jessica said, this is a conversation on how we can come to grips with the world we live in and the part we have to play in fixing our common home. The parts that I really wanted to talk about with you all is not everybody knows what eco grief is. I didn't know what eco grief was a year ago, but I knew what it felt like. And so I also wanted to talk about how it affects us and how we really take this in and we're just holding it and we really don't know what to do with it all the time. And I'd love for us to share our own experiences and stories with each other so we can use that as a form of mindfulness to really get out what we've been feeling. And lastly, just how we can heal ourselves and our common home. First off, I just wanted to provide a very brief explanation about what eco grief is. It is basically the sense of loss that we feel due to all of the changing nature of the Earth's climate and our lives within it. It's very complicated, whether it's from acute stress of having been in a natural disaster to the rippling effects that we may feel from all of what is happening around us in the future. And speaking of the future, there's also a phrase known as eco-anxiety, and that is really honing in on that feeling of anxiety that we may feel in response to all of the threats that climate change has. Next, how does it affect us? So there's two main things that can be broken down into a lot. There's a slide after this that really gets into the different layers of it. But basically, we have physical aspects and mental aspects. So the physical being life-altering tragedies that we may have been a part of. I myself had a fire at a very young age, and that affected my life very deeply. And then we may know others that have, experienced this, or just be wary of all of the things that this is going to do and affect us for our physical health, our mental health, and for our future. And so for the mental health aspect of this, while it can affect us physically, it really does affect us emotionally, which can go back to the physical aspects of this and really, hurt us inside. And it can affect our communities and the way that we talk with others. And so to really dive into that a little bit more, we can see with this chart that it affects us physically, it affects the systems that we are a part of, and it affects us in many different ways, as we talked about mental, physical, and community. So just having examples of the physical impacts that we have, as I said, I experienced a fire at a young age, so there's wildfires, floodings, we can talk about, all of the different horrific hurricanes that have happened and devastated us across the world lately with Puerto Rico or the floods in Pakistan, the droughts, droughts in, even in here in the United States, we have droughts in California. And so all of these physical things are affecting our human systems, being, our urban infrastructure, our transportation networks, our food security, as well as our economic sectors and our infrastructure for energy and our security. And so then we really start to see the effects on us as an individual and us as a society. We see people, whether that's physical impairments that people have gained. I had asthma as a young age, and I've come to learn, being in the climate justice movement, that many people that look like me have actually experienced asthma at higher rates than normal. So we can see changes in fitness, physical trauma, broken bones, all of these different things, diseases and toxins related to environmental disasters, and then mental impacts, really that sense of loss and hopelessness, the threats to our autonomy and personal identity, post-traumatic stress from any of those physical impacts that have really happened. And then that also affects our community, whether it's from decreased community cohesion or social instability. And so it really does affect us in ways that we may not have initially thought of or had words to describe. Eco grief, eco anxiety. Those are the words that we can use for when we're really experiencing these things. I'd like to share a quote that I found from one of my personal heroes, who I actually got to meet last month, Vanessa Nakate. She is a Ugandan climate activist, and she speaks about this, and she doesn't use words of eco-grief or anxiety, but you can see it in the way that she's talking. It reads, "You cannot adapt to lost cultures. You cannot adapt to lost traditions. You cannot adapt to lost history. You cannot adapt to starvation. And you cannot adapt to extinction." In this, we really see that sense of urgency, that sense of loss that we can feel from the impacts of climate change. When we think about climate change at a surface level, we think, oh, it's getting warmer, the seas are rising, but really, it's so much more than that. When we say that the seas are rising, people are experiencing their livelihoods taken away from them from floods. People are experiencing droughts, and it can be something that can feel overwhelming. And so I will eventually be sharing some resources that you can look at to really see how we can combat this, how we can combat climate change, and how we can combat this feeling inside of us. And I really wanted to open the floor to have people possibly share any experiences that they may have, the feelings of anxiety that they may have about climate change. Would anybody like to share? And to get us started, some questions that you may think of is, what does the climate crisis mean to you? And how may eco-grief or eco-anxiety manifest in your life?
This is Annie McIver, and we have a garden at Cameron Grove, and we've been doing it for several years. And okay, for the past 2 years, I see a difference. I do see a difference. We plant the vegetables, and for some reason, God blessed us where the animals were not eating the vegetables. But for the past 2 years, there's been a change, a shift. And last year, the animals ate almost all of the collard crop. And we'd never had that problem before. And I noticed the insects got into the collards. This year and last year, it was a deer, but this year is something smaller, maybe a rabbit. I covered things over with crates, the large milk crates when I planted the collards. They still, whatever it is, still got into them and ate more than half of the crop. So I see a change there in the past 2 years. There is a change.
Yes, exactly. We see it in our everyday lives, and we don't necessarily even think about how it may be related to climate change. So
Mhm.
when we're talking about animals and food security, right? It's animals' habitats are being lost every single day due to human intervention,
Mhm.
and that can be related as well because when we are, you know, deforesting places, when we are creating urban sprawl, we're also creating pollution and we're creating tinier pockets where the ecosystems that we have in place are not able to function the way that they're supposed to. And so it affects us in ways that we wouldn't even see, such as animals coming out to intervene in what we have been doing. Because we've been intervening in their life so much that they can't help but have to intervene in ours.
Mhm.
Has that given you any sense of stress in your life?
Sure. Because I was afforded, we were afforded a grant to, grow the vegetables to give to the needy. Um, so that will reduce how many collards we can give out for Thanksgiving. But I'm not going to let it stress me because I know God is going to make a way. But I just wanted to share that there is a difference, and there has been a growth of um, buildings going up in that area, homes, and the trees and things being pushed down. So I know that's what it is. They don't have the habitat anymore.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
So I guess we will just have to try to put up some fence in some way or another if we continue with it. I decided that maybe I will just plant turnip and collard turnips and mustard greens instead of the collards because they don't seem to bother the turnips and the mustard greens. It's the collards that they're zeroing in on.
Yeah. Thank you again.
So thank you.
And so yeah, we see these stories in our everyday lives, as I have said before. Does anybody else have any examples that they may think of in which they're really any like changing the way that they have to do things, or just a vague sense of stress? I know personally, I actually have had to change my plans for the future. When I was in middle school, I was thinking that, oh, people are going to live to like 120 years old, and I'm gonna have like two kids and a house with a picket fence. And lately, I've really been thinking about, what does it really mean to be a child bearer? What does it mean to have children in the world that we are in current day? So I've really been second guessing myself if I even want to have children. And those are ways in which climate anxiety and climate grief have really been affecting me.
Ren, this is Arlesia Simmons. One of the ways climate grief, and you, as you noted, we don't necessarily always know the ways in which to name things. Growing up on the coast, and so I'm from the coast of South Carolina, but even if we look at the coast of North Carolina with flooding as well as with hurricanes and the stress of this period we are in called hurricane season. If you've grown up in a state of always feeling the need to evacuate, and because now we have more images and we see more of what is happening in coastal communities, we all participate in some way, especially when hurricanes are hitting other countries and other islands. But there is this grief that takes place that it's hard to explain to people who aren't impacted as much by flooding. But nowadays, it seems like we're, no matter if you're on the on the coast or you're inland, you could be impacted by flooding. And so just the anxiety of preparing, because hurricane season goes until the end of November, of staying in a state of readiness, of not knowing if you could possibly lose everything. And that is now because of climate change and just the way in which hurricanes as well as the weather is being impacted.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, it really can be a very large sense of dread and just displacement when we think about our everyday lives and how it can really change that, like the perspectives that we have when we're faced with the loss of our homes. It can be so terrifying. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, and coastal resilience is actually one of the things that North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light and the Eco Justice Connection is really striving towards nowadays, because it can affect so many people, and we would hate to see people's homes go underwater. And so really thinking about what we can do to help people is so important when it comes to trying to reconcile what has already been taking place. And so we can have more people share stories if they would like, but I did want to move on to maybe a little bit more of an actionable approach to what people can do to really combat this feeling and combat the climate crisis. And so there were two things that I really wanted to bring up. There was, yes. You have a hand.
Hi. Oh, thanks for this, Ren. This is really great. And also hearing the shares from everyone. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to add a really quick tidbit about I can totally sympathize with the eco grief and anxiety, especially as a parent of two young children, and having just seen recently, like this article, someone was, I don't know if it's like actually a well-established article, but it was saying that, that there really is no way to go down the 1.5 degrees Celsius, or it's about how to bring it back. And like in the next 2 decades, there's just going to be severe heat and all these extreme weather patterns, which we already see. And it just terrifies me. And so I sometimes have that, Ren, you mentioned that vague feeling of just like, you just feel like unsettled, I don't know, like, and it's not quite like I'm feeling anxious but it's like a sort of unsettled, vague in the background, like a kind of a dread, like a subtle dread feeling. And I think about my children and not just my children, I think about all the children. And so that makes me feel that sense of vague, just dread, or I don't know, like that kind of feeling. So sorry, I just wanted to share before you went on. So.
Oh no, I really appreciate it. I mean, we're always open to conversation. This is a sacred conversation, a sacred place. And yeah, I've seen throughout my life, and definitely being more into the climate space nowadays, that people have really been talking about, what about the next generation? What are we going to do? I've had people even apologize to me saying, my life, I feel like it's going to be so different from what you're going to have to live in the future. So it's just so sad. I'm so sorry. And I just think this is what it is, but I'm trying. I'm trying to do what I can. So, thank you for doing what you can to try and make a difference, because, helping to lead IPL, I know that you're doing a lot of great stuff, a lot of great work. Yeah. And which leads into, so what can we do? And I wanted to highlight some mental health practices as well as ways that we can take action. I highly suggest that people look into more resources and information and trainings on eco-grief. I will share some on another slide that I have, as well as just, to talk to people and to talk to potentially even like a climate aware therapist. And I know that not everybody has the resources to go to therapy, and I think there are some free therapy resources that I've been looking into, and so we'll share those after this presentation. But there is a therapist finder resource that I can share during the presentation currently. And really, it's just so important that we are part of our community and we know about the resources that are there within our community and the resources for mental health. And I mean, hey, PHW, like, what more could you ask for? You guys are all about health, and I love that. And I think that I'm sure there are several programs or resources that you even have that could help with grief and anxiety. So those are just a few things. And we'll share more in an email after this later, as well as on my resources slide. And then ways that we can just take action for our future. One of the biggest things that you can feel when you're feeling eco-grief is that sense of loss, like what can I even do? What could be done? I feel so lost. And that's how I've felt before in the past, and I feel that even today. As a climate activist, it can be really hard, and I know that, that can sound hopefully not too insensitive. It's just that we're all human, and there are people that are being impacted, people who have to breathe toxic fumes, and that is something that we all cannot let happen. It's something that we have to speak out about. It's something that we have to unite around and try and prevent. And so me as a climate activist, as a Black person, as a person that was born as a female, I have experienced things in my life that I have had to grieve over, and I have friends who have experienced things in their lives, whether it's flash floods or fires that are just devastating. And so when we think about the past, we also have to look towards the future. And so that can look like advocating for a better tomorrow. So talking to friends and really getting to them to understand, that the climate crisis matters. It's not something that we just, only need to joke about. I mean, jokes are great ways to relieve stress too. I know as a Gen Z, like, we joke all of the time, and but there are jokes and then there's taking action. And so really connecting to your community members and family and friends and going out and taking action. Voting. We just had the midterms. So, thinking about what advocates are really, what people are really advocating for, clean justice policies, things that will help the environmental justice movement, not just the environment, but the people that are being impacted the most by the climate crisis. And so just as PHW is a great source for mental health, the Eco-Justice Connection here and the Council of Churches is a great resource for creating, mobilizing the environmental justice movement. And so, we're here to talk. If you ever wish to talk, I'm here. And I can leave my email in the chat later when we're having a discussion. And so I talked about the resources earlier, and I just wanted to share more about those. And these are only a few of the resources that I have. I have even more, but I don't want to overload people. There's some books and websites here. And I just wanted to put the two most obvious ones. So the NC Council of Churches website, you can find all of the info about the Eco-Justice Connection, which has North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light within it. Those are the organizations that I'm with, as well as, PHW, Jessica, everybody. And so I highly encourage you to go there to just search around our website and see what you can find. And we also have some really good videos and webinars from the past on the NCIPL YouTube. So that is the link for that. And I mentioned this earlier, but there's a therapist directory shared by the Climate Psychiatry organization that really focuses on climate aware therapists. So if you ever really do want to talk to somebody about any of these experiences that you're having, I highly suggest that you look up therapists from that directory. And I think that another great way that we can really try to come to terms and grips with the situation that we're in is through poetry. There is some poetry on the Climate Psychology Alliance website, as well as blogs and other book recommendations besides the two that I've listed below. And I encourage you to write your own poetry as well. I am actually a poet myself, and I've made some poetry that was really helped me, just get out the frustration that I've had from all of this, from thinking about it, and being in the movement, and just trying to create change. And the words that we say and the actions that we do are really powerful, not only in and of themselves, but because they can inspire other people. And so I challenge you to, try and inspire other people, whether that be through storytelling, poetry, just having a conversation, I think is so important. And if you ever don't really know what to say, especially when it comes to eco grief, the next two resources below can try and help facilitate that conversation. There's a teacher toolkit that was shared there, and as well as an emotional resilience toolkit. And so I encourage you to look at those two if you ever really want to find some words outside of this presentation to help you start that conversation with a classroom, with your friends, or your community. And then if you want any just, good old books to read, just always go into the basics. I recommend these two below. It's one called A Guide to Eco-Anxiety, How to Protect the Planet and Your Mental Health. And then the other one is A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety and How to Keep Your Cool in a Warming Planet. And so this really concludes the end of the presentation portion of this. I'd love to continue the conversation if anybody has any questions or experiences that they would like to share. But that's it for the presentation itself. And if anybody wants me to go back to a certain slide, feel free to ask, but I'm going to stop sharing for now. So yeah, thank you for listening to me talk, and I'd love to listen to you all talk.
Go ahead, Arlicia.
Ren, I wanted to add something. In Reverend Jessica's prayer this morning, she mentioned the word, may we be convicted, or something to that degree. And so as Miss Annie was sharing about the animals impacting the farming, so often we're kind of so busy, focused on our own needs. I know personally that this conversation made me think about the animals, and we know not just in their community, but in all of our communities, there's building, and we're taking them out of their natural habitat. And I was just thinking, there's this contemporary gospel song we sing in churches, and it talks about, I need you to survive. And so we are dependent on those insects that are pesky, and we're dependent on the deer. And in some cases, in this regard, even though we need the food for our survival, they're also in a stage of whatever. I'm sure there's some literature and someone who does research on animal and grieving, and they're trying to figure out how to survive. And so it's just a reminder that we're all interdependent. And so when we talk about eco grief, sometimes our grief starts where someone else's grief ends. And we are all in some strange way connected even when we are not directly impacted. And that is because we are part of creation. And so, we just think of ourselves in the Imago Dei and not think about creation and our impact on the environment, nature, the animals that now too must figure it out. And there is probably no Zoom session for them to try to figure it out. So just a reminder that we have a ways to go as it relates to being better stewards of our environment, and just be in prayer for just how this whole system is all is an interweb of connecting forces.
Yeah, I really feel like you just hit on like the heart and the soul of environmental justice. Like it is all interconnected. All of, the social aspects, all of the economic aspects, all of the environmental aspects of climate change are really one and the same. And so we as humans like to categorize all of these different things, but really what we're in this beautiful place that we call Earth is an interconnected web of resources and people and animals and things that are all depending on each other to survive. And so when we cut one root, we're really cutting the leaves, we're cutting the roots, we're cutting ourselves off when we're hurting the environment. When we're hurting animals and when we're hurting others, we are hurting ourselves. And so I really loved when you said, when one person's grief ends, another may begin, because that is so true. There are so many factors that we don't think about when it comes to the environment, when it comes to our society. And so I really appreciate you bringing that into the discussion.
Mm-hmm. And that was really good, because I remember last year, I planted the collards and I left a whole slat of collard plants out, okay, for my nephew. I came back and you know how you do a double take, and I looked over there and the deer had eaten all the collards down, just like they had taken a lawnmower. And then they went over there and ate the whole 48, I think 48 plants of collards. They ate the whole thing down. And I had to just sit there, and I just had to stand there and laugh. You hear me? I just laughed about it. It was nothing. It was so funny when I thought about it. I'm stupid enough to leave the whole slat of collards out there. What did I expect? I don't know. They enjoyed it. They went down just like it was a lawnmower.
Hey, I mean, where somebody's grief ends, another one begins. So, those rabbits or whatever they were, they liked it.
They're happy.
Yeah.
Ren, this was really helpful. I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I know all of us here today hold eco grief in so many ways, and a few of you have heard me talk about my experience living in Wilmington. Thanks for sharing, Arlesia, with the hurricanes there. And gosh, me and my wife, we had to evacuate for about a month just during Florence. I think 2 weeks during Hurricane Matthew. I mean, so my life, and then we couldn't, the entire time I lived down there, we couldn't drink the drinking water because of Gen X in the water. So we were impacted by that. And then when I lived in Washington State, we had wildfires every summer. So the air quality was terrible. And as was mentioned earlier, to have children, to not have children. I know so many of folks in my age are contemplating that. I mean, huge life decisions, where to live, whether to have a family, to grow your family. I mean, we are holding a lot. And so, Ren, one question I have for you, this is tied to eco grief for me, is that I am always, I come back to a place of anger with environmental racism in particular. I connect that to eco grief living throughout North Carolina and in the South. the more I learn about just the flooding in certain areas of towns, access to clean drinking water in certain areas of counties, and even the more I've learned about the alert system going to certain people, whether that's tornado or whatever it may be. Environmental racism has been really heavy on my heart lately. I didn't know if you had a good resource. It's okay if you don't, but I didn't know if you wanted to speak onto that, how it relates to eco grief, because that has been something that I'm ashamed to say, but I'm proud to say I'm learning more about. But I did not know a lot about until the past 5-ish, 6-ish years, and so.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing it up. And I touched on it briefly when I mentioned that, asthma rates for people that look like me, I'm a Black person, are higher. And so when we talk about, the physical impacts or the health impacts of climate change, we also have to recognize that some of the people that are contributing the least to climate change are the ones most impacted. That is something that Vanessa Nakate, as a Ugandan, has said time and time again. And when we look at Africa, or we look at, brown-skinned people, we look at people here in the United States, we can see time and time again that those are the places that have really been targeted for all of the pollution, all of the industrial toxins that have been created, and it is not justice. It is not sacred. It is not a thing that belongs in a world full of love. And so when people have to experience environmental catastrophes, environmental toxins, over and over and over again, it grades on their mental health and their well-being. And so, honestly, I would say that, people of color are probably the ones who are suffering eco grief and eco anxiety the most, even if we don't necessarily say it or have the words to say it. That is what is happening. And in this moment, I would say that I don't have a resource to share, but I will say that, the Eco Justice Connection, NCIPL, we have conversations and webinars about issues on environmental justice, which heavily coincides with the talk that we're having today. And so we often share resources, and I can make sure that I get resources to you when we do share out the email for the sacred conversation. And actually, I just wanted to briefly share something that I had written that really kind of hits to the core of what I was talking about, for how I don't have a resource necessarily, but I do have a very small poem about what it feels like to be targeted by environmental racism, and the work that we do at the Eco Justice Center. And so it goes: I believe in beloved community, in living in unity, in standing all together so we have more opportunities. We'll have peace through justice when the movement's not just us. We'll bring faith into our hearts and remove toxic theology from our constructs. Let's separate church from hate. And so that really brings faith into the conversation too. And so while I don't say environmental justice in that poem right there, it is innately within the work that we do. I wrote that poem as a response to the question, what does the Eco Justice Connection do? What does the North Carolina Council of Churches do? And that is what we do. We're trying to separate church from hate. We're trying to bring awareness of justice and to bring people into this movement. And so that in and of itself is a resource that we have. The community that we're building, a beloved community, that is what we have. And that is our strongest resource when it comes to combating climate justice, health justice, any of it, and all of it comes down to the community that we build together.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Ren. We're so grateful for you. You've really given us a lot to think about. And so everybody knows we will send out a follow-up email, including the resources that Ren shared. I'm also thinking of a few on top of my head that I know about with grief circles and different efforts in North Carolina around just to provide support as we all navigate this in our own ways, because this is hard, difficult, a difficult part of being in the world today. Unfortunately, it's just naming it what it is. And as Ren did a beautiful job expressing, is that eco grief and the climate crisis and these parts are theological concerns, because the way that we are impacted and cause impact is a shared experience, a global shared experience. And so there's dignity in that, dignity issues. So God is with us as we carry this, and I hope that you all know that. But please know that Ren, they are available. Ren, do you want to put your email in the chat? And again, we are going to send a follow-up email. Elizabeth, do you mind sharing the slides again for me? And we can't thank you enough for joining us today, especially on a Monday with a hard conversation. I just want to also share Stephanie Sanders' email, phwinfo@ncchurches.org. We have a couple of weeks left in this Partners in Health and Wholeness mini grant cycle. So if your faith community is interested in attaining one of our grants to work on any health topic, which can of course be tied to climate care and mental health, as we're talking about today, please reach out to us, and we'll be happy to get you going on that. We also have a special BIPOC mental health grant. So that's for any faith community, predominantly of color, to work on mental health. And so we can, of course, tie that to climate efforts as well. Next slide, please.
I did want to mention
Oh,
that
go ahead.
Stacy did have their hand raised.
Oh,
I
thanks.
wasn't sure if we would do it now or later.
We'll get to that in just a moment. Thanks, Ren, for pointing that out to me. Great. And then I just wanted to highlight the Partners in Health and Wholeness team. Ren is a part of our team through the North Carolina Council of Churches, but this is our PHW team. So just know that you have somebody to reach out to as your faith community wants to begin or sustain health project efforts. We're here for you. We are statewide. So just wanted you all to be able to put some faces to some names. Next slide, please. And then upcoming on Thursday, December 1st at 11 a.m., today was at noon, but this event will be at 11 a.m. We're going to have another awesome speaker, a sacred conversation entitled Moving from Frantic Doing to Sacred Being, How to Find Rest in the Holidays and Beyond, with Travis Jeffords, who is a awesome person. He is a therapist at Sanctuary Counseling Group. He also has his MDiv, so he has theological training as well. And so this conversation, hopefully you can join us, because this is going to go much deeper than the usual cliches, self-care around the holidays, the cliches we've all heard. Travis is going to go far deeper into that and invite much more sustainable practical ideas on how to care for ourselves during what is always a busy time. Thank you. And Elizabeth put the registration link. And so, Elizabeth, before we do our sending, Stacy, we want to make sure we hear from you. So if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity for the sharing and all. And I'm sorry, I couldn't be here at the beginning of what was offered. So I look forward to receiving the recording whenever that comes forward. I I wondered if you had talked about compound grief, eco grief. It was alluded to when it was mentioned about people that when we have other storms coming, they're still dealing with the effects of a previous environmental grief situation regarding perhaps a hurricane or flooding and all, and then the collective grief that we all carry. I've been involved with disaster relief efforts, and for some of the places, especially down east, that continually get flooded and with these storms, and how it's affecting those that are broader than our areas. What I'm keenly aware of is the fact that those circumstances of weather level the playing field. It's different from what was spoken about earlier, which also in its own way has a justice issues around those that are in places where power plants and other businesses choose to put their waste, and the disparate ways in which that is carried out, whether it's pipeline efforts or dumping of coal ash and things like that. And so I just wondered if you had addressed, or if there's any resources that you can provide later around this feeling of a collective grief and a compound grief that people are experiencing.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I had not put words to the concept of compound. Sorry about that. I had not put words to the concept of compound grief, but I believe that it was very present in the conversation that we were having, especially during the question and answer period. I think that it is very important because oftentimes when we have moments of grief, I wonder if other people have heard of this, but I've often found that death comes in threes. And so that can kind of look like many different things besides from just like the physical death of our family members. It can also, there are many tragedies that happen often at the same time. And how do we really reconcile that? Like how do we really pick apart the individual struggles that we are struggling with, as well as the societal issues that we're struggling with? It all is a lot to process, and I would love to make sure to include a resource or two about that when we do share the email out, because I do think that it is important to address. And I would just like to bring up the idea of, and people could possibly look this up, but the sociological imagination is a concept that really gets into the feeling that we have problems in our society, and when we have problems that are personal to us, we oftentimes drag on ourselves and say like, oh, I'm dealing with this, like why do I have to go through this, what's happening? And we feel that stress, right? But the idea of sociological imagination is that a lot of the problems that we are actually having are problems that we're experiencing as a society. And so we are not to blame for those problems. We are not to blame for those who are targeted by our system and made to, have lesser prospects than others. For those who are homeless, for instance, often it is a failure of the system. When we talk about all of the natural disasters that are occurring, whether that causes people to lose their homes or lose their jobs or lose the lives of family members, that is not a personal fault. That is a sociological, that is a problem with our society that we collectively must try and solve. and push for our, the people that make the laws to help address. And so, that's how we can really start to, deal with compound grief. Know that it is not just us oftentimes, and understand our role in helping to solve those issues. And just be aware of them, and to talk to people about them so that we're not bottling them up. And I hope that addresses your question.
Thank you.
And thank you again.
Well, thank y'all for joining us today and spending your lunch hour with us. To send us forth, I am going to do what has come a little bit of a tradition at PHW, which is a closing of 3 deep breaths. I really like this tradition because it reminds me I'm an embodied person, and often I carry my stress in my body and I don't realize it. And breathing often helps me remember that. So I am going to count off our first breath, and then as you are able, take the 2 on your own. I invite you to feel your body in your chair, wherever you're sitting, and just truly lean into your embodiment. So 1. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Monday.